The second exercise, underline the object pronouns used as direct object. In these sentences, there is a direct object, but it is not a noun or a noun phrase. It is a pronoun, an object pronoun. An example, Mr. and Mrs. Huan found it. What did they find? They found it. It is the direct object. You are asked to do the same in the rest of sentences. Notice that in the simple sentences, sometimes we find direct objects in the form of a gerund or an infinitive. Look at the first example. Mr. Adler enjoys baking. What does Mr. Adler enjoy? He enjoys baking. Baking is the direct object. In the second example, Mrs. Potter plans to bake for the party. What does Mrs. Potter plan? She plans to bake. This is the direct object. The next exercise, circle the direct object in each sentence. Write N if it is a noun, write P if it is a pronoun, write G if it is a gerund, and write I if it is an infinitive. So we have different types of objects in these sentences. You just circle the direct object and show its type. Now let's move on to see some exercises about the indirect object. But before doing this, we'll revise the difference between the direct object and the indirect object. Look at the sentence, Mr. Simpson is buying a sweater. What is Mr. Simpson buying? A sweater. This is a direct object, and the sentence ends here. There is no other element. The second example, Mr. Simpson bought his dog a sweater. Now we see the same verb, and there is a direct object in the sentence, which is a sweater. This is the thing which is directly affected by the action of buying. Now, what is the receiver of the action of buying? It is his dog. The action is done for him or for it in that case. So his dog is the indirect object. The indirect object is the person or the animate element for whom or to whom the action is done. Exercise. Circle the noun or pronoun used as the indirect object. Look at the example. They wrote as a letter. They wrote what? A letter. Direct object. For whom or to whom? To as. As is the indirect object. You do the same in the following sentences. Another exercise here is on the indirect object. Now let's try to test whether you are able to see whether there is an indirect object in the sentence or there is no indirect object in the sentence. You read the following sentences, and then if you find that the sentence contains an indirect object, you put a tick. If not, you don't put the tick. An example is done for you. Mr. Reynolds took a walk. Here there is no indirect object, there is no tick. The carpenter built his wife a bookshelf. What did the carpenter build? He built a bookshelf. For whom? For his wife. So there is an indirect object plus a direct object. So in that case you have to put a tick. You try to do the same thing in the following sentences and test yourself. This is the last exercise on direct and indirect objects. You are asked to write your own sentences. So write 2 sentences with a direct object. This means that the sentence will contain a subject, a verb, and an object, a direct object. Then write 2 sentences with a direct and an indirect object. It contains the subject, the verb, the first object, then the second object. Here in this second part, it is not important whether the direct object comes before or after the indirect object. You are free. But just pay attention. In some cases, you are obliged to use to or for, and sometimes you are not obliged to use them. This depends on the position of the direct and indirect objects, whether they come before or after each other.